Hello, and thank you for tuning into I Stand with Zambia YouTube channel. My name is Wansa. This channel has no political affiliation, but it is 100% affiliated with being a Zambian. You know, back in 2012, I remember seeing this headline of Western Province wanting to separate from the rest of Zambia. And I was like, what? Why? I immediately saw in my head the map of Zambia with this big hole and half of it taken away. And I was just like, why do they want to leave? What's going on? And, you know, I didn't get any concrete answer from anyone. I do remember, though, seeing the word Barotseland. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. So fast forward, we're now in the year 2020. I just started my YouTube channel and I'm speaking to one of my subscribers on Facebook. And I say to him, you know, we were emailing, Facebook messaging. So I said, you know, I want to look into, you know, the whole controversy about Western Province, Barotseland thing. And he was like, don't do it. It's way too controversial. It might start problems for you, you know, just leave it alone. So I forgot about it. Then here we are now in 2021, and I'm thinking to myself, okay, I know we were colonized, but like, why? Well, Mwanza, I mean, to Cecil Rhodes, right? 1964. Yes, I know that, but why? How did Cecil Rhodes get here? You know? How did we become colonized? What happened? What was the process? What's the story? You know? So this two-part documentary is me taking you down the journey for you to see what I discovered. It's amazing. It's a great layer to the foundation of the Republic of Zambia that we call home. And I want you to subscribe to this channel if you have not already. If you have already subscribed, thank you so much. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I would like everyone, share this video with every Zambian that you know, because this is a story about us. This is a story about Zambia, our home, our land, our country, our republic. And I also want you to like the video and leave a comment. You know, let's talk about it. I mean, have you been as clueless as I have been up until this point? Probably have. I believe that this video is for everybody. If you already know about the Barotseland history in Zambia, I believe that this is going to, you know, that you might, maybe just a little detail that we're like, oh, okay, I didn't know about that. But if you're on the other side and you're like, well, I have no idea, you're gonna know quite a lot. And if you're in the middle where I was like, well, I don't really know it. I mean, honestly, completely lost. You are gonna find your footing, you're gonna find your grounding, okay? So in order for us to be able to look into these details, we have to go back. And when I mean back, I mean way back. Let's get into it. The year is 1750. And the map of Africa that we're used to seeing nowadays hadn't yet taken shape, because the scramble for Africa didn't happen until 1884. So in 1750, what we see here are kingdoms. Various kingdoms in Central and Southern Africa. You can see the Roswy Kingdom, the Lozi Kingdom, the Luba, and the Lunda. Fast forward to 1840, and the Kalolo Kingdom, pushed out by the Zulu Wars, overthrow an existing Lozi Kingdom. This is why the Lozi language is a variant to Sesotho. And when David Livingstone visited the area in 1855, he finds these very Makololo people in charge, and they have a chief, Chief Sekeletu. In 1864, the Lozi people overthrow the Kalolo kingdom and they regain the throne. Sipopa, a grandson of a former Lozi king prior to the Kalolo invasion, King Mulambwa, is crowned. Now, as more explorers enter the interior of Africa, we get a bit more detail of what the area looked like in this map seen in 1870. And what was listed as Lozi in the 1750 map is now listed as Barotse in this 1870 map. In 1878, another grandson of Mulambwa is crowned, and his name is Lubosi. But in 1884, the member of council leads a rebellion against Lubosi, and Lubosi is removed from the throne, and Tatila Akufuna is set as the Litunga. Lubosi crushes the rebellion, and a trader named George Westbeach, who regularly visited the Litunga, Lubosa, to go and buy ivory, he describes the scene of how Lubosi crushed the rebellion. He says, the flat from Lialui to Mongu, a distance of 12 miles without a bush, is even now covered with skeletons and grinning skulls. Other accounts of the crushing of this rebellion say that Lubosi fed some of his enemies to the crocodiles. Now, before this event, he was simply known as Lubosi, but after, he took on the name Lewanika, which means conqueror. Francois Colliard, a missionary from the Paris Evangelical Mission Society, is making his way up from the Transvaal to go preach to the Shona people. However, King Lobengula of the Ndebele refuses to let him pass through his land to get to the Shona people. So, he ends up going west. If you look at the blue arrow, they end up going into what is now Botswana. But at that time, it was Ngwatu's kingdom. And their king was King Kama. King Kama had already become a Christian, and he advises Francois to go to Barotseland to see the Lozi king Lewanika. So, Francois crosses over and arrives in Sesheke in 1885. He then travels to Choma and sets up a mission. 1 year later, in 1886, an escort is sent to bring Francois up to Lelui to finally meet Lewanika. Between 1886 and 1889, Francois is settled in Lealui. This is his house. He sets up a mission in Lealui, Safula, and Sesheke. Here are some images that I found of each mission. The first is a church being constructed in Lealui, and the view of the station from the river. The next is the ascent going to Safula mission. And finally, Here is a view from the river looking onto Sesheke Mission. Lewanika is concerned about the threat of a raid coming from King Lobengula of the Indebele tribe. And at some point, King Kama lets Lewanika know that he personally has no fear of the Indebele or the Portuguese slave traders because he is under the British protection. Bechuanaland became a British protectorate in 1885. And so King Kama advises Lewanika to do likewise, become a protectorate. Now, what is a protectorate? A protectorate is a state that is controlled and protected by another sovereign state. A dependent territory that has autonomy over most internal affairs. It has its own internal government that is under the control of an outside power. The year is now 1889, and Lewanika gets Francois to draft a letter seeking to be a protectorate of the British. This letter gets to Sir Sidney Shippard. He's the resident commissioner of Bechuanaland Protectorate. It's now April, and German trader Henry Ware visits the Litunga. He lavishes Lewanika with clothes, blankets, guns, and other gifts. He even assures Lewanika that he will arrange the Queen's protection. First of all, the guy's a German, okay? Anyway, the Ware concession that Henry sent out to get is signed and agreed between him and Lewanika on June 27, 1889. And this gives Henry Ware the rights to mine in the area for 20 years. He also offers Lewanika 200 pounds a year in royalties. Now, I calculated what is the value of 200 pounds a year in 2021 off of 1889, and it comes up to $6,300, or in Zambian kwacha, 164,000 kwacha. I found this map that plots out the various minerals that are spread out across the land. And these minerals include gold, copper, emeralds, aquamarine, manganese, iron, zinc, just to name a few. So it's also important to understand that during this time, the Europeans were going through the technological revolution. And so supplying raw materials would give you wealth and power. Lewanika at this point is pretty much convinced that his status as a protectorate is in progress. But in actual fact, the very Ware concession that he had signed in June, by October, had been sold for 900 pounds to Cecil Rhodes, the man whose dream was to construct a railway to connect Cape to Cairo. His British South Africa company sends Frank Lochner, and he arrives in March 1890. He lies to Lewanika that he represents the Queen, when in fact he represented a private company. He gives Lewanika the assurance of protection from the Indebele, and Lewanika signs what is known as the Lochner Concession in June. Now, when Cecil Rhodes had a look at the Ware concession, he wanted to get more out of it. Rather than having a time limit of 20 years to mine, the Lochner concession gave the British South Africa Company exclusive mineral rights. And they had told Lewanika that he would not be able to make a treaty with anybody else. They promised to give him 2,000 pounds a year, which is about $63,000 in today's money. They would also give him guns and 3% mineral royalties. They promised to send a British representative to be resident in Lealui, and that they were going to build schools and promote trade. The Foreign Office had serious reservations over the nature and extent of the supposed protectorate that Cecil Rhodes' British South Africa Company had acquired. The Foreign Office never sanctioned the Lochner concessions because the details in the concession gave the British South Africa Company a monopoly, which was actually prohibited within the company's own charter. It had already been established that Barotseland was claimed to fall within the British sphere of influence, and this was according to the Anglo-Portuguese Treaty of 1891. But the Foreign Office were not convinced that the Lochner concession had actually established a British protectorate over Barotseland. Neither had they given the company any rights to administer the territory as a protectorate. And so, in 1897, after 7 long years, Lewanika finally gets a resident commissioner. His name is Robert Correndon. He has ties with the British South Africa Company, and they are the ones who actually proposed him to be the resident commissioner to the High Commissioner of South Africa. And so that appointment was approved, and Mr. Correndon represented the British government, and in his capacity as resident, he declared Barotseland to be a British protectorate. Correndon sets up administrative offices in Monze, Kazungula, Mungu, and Kalabo. This is the house that Correndon lived in. It was and is known as the Administrator's House. This single-story red brick structure that lies on a large estate in Kalomo was constructed between 1903 and 1904. It is said to have been the first brick building in the protectorate and served as the first state house before Livingstone became the capital city of the protectorate in 1907. This building, the Administrator's House, was designated as a heritage site in 1957. Cecil Rhodes had a plan. He had already instructed Correndon to get even more concessions from Lewanika. He wanted Lewanika to give his British South Africa Company exclusive land rights. And so, 1 year later, in 1888, Correndon convinces Lewanika to accompany him down to Livingstone, from Lealui to Livingstone, to meet Captain Arthur Lawley. He was a senior representative for the British South Africa Company and an administrator for Matabeleland. The encounter of Captain Lawley meeting King Lewanika is as follows. Lewanika's temporary royal court was prepared for him on the bank close to the confluence
of the Maramba River with the Zambezi. The king's arrival at his camp the next day was made known to us by a general outburst of shouts and songs, and the beating of the drums and tom-toms. The king brought with him his son, Letia, who has adopted the Christian faith, and his chief counselors. The king's costume was rather remarkable. On his head, he wore a black broad-brimmed felt hat. He also wore a long bright blue dressing gown, much embroidered with scarlet braiding Manchester style, a flannel shirt, tweed waistcoat, trousers, and aggressively new yellow boots. In the evening, he replaced his nightcap with a blue tam o'shanter and an ulster. Lolly then says, an hour or more, we walked down to the river to inspect the big boat which I had brought up with me, which was then in course of construction. The king and his son, who was a clever carpenter, thanks to the instructions of the French Protestant missionaries at Kazungula, took the greatest interest in the tools of our carpenters, as well as the boat itself. The following day, I arrived at a great reception by the king and his people. We were met by Letia and some of the chief counselors. A wide path had been cleared from the river edge to the king's kothla, or council chamber, and on either side were crowded various detachments of Barotse, who, as we passed, greeted Letia with a loud and prolonged chorus of Yo Sho. A salute only offered to royalty. Some days later, the whole of the new concession had been read and interpreted clause by clause to the king and his people, who expressed themselves perfectly satisfied with the terms.
The Lolly concession was widely considered to be more of an upgrade to the existing Lochner concession. This is because the Lolly concession gave the British South Africa Company administrative rights over the land that Lewanika ruled. This is going to be key because later on we're going to see how the British South Africa Company would find minerals outside of Lewanika's territory and come back to him and say, claim that you own this, sign the concession so we could go get the minerals. Okay, we're going to look into that when we see the 1914 concession. But for now, sticking to this Lolly concession. So the British government actually never signed off on this treaty. Instead, in 1899, they issued the Barotseland Order in Council. And what this does is that it changes the name of the territory. As you see in the red box, the order is just saying the Queen uses her powers to say that the territory will now be known as this. And the second box just lays out the parameters of where the land is. So it talks about how it goes all the way to the Kafue River, to the Congo Free State, around to Angola and Namibia, cut off by the Zambezi River, things like that. Now, this is 1899. The Bemba Kingdom, Lunda Kingdom, and Ngoni Kingdom pretty much all refuse to relinquish their rights to the British South Africa Company. The company then used force to subdue them. And in 1900, a year later, the Queen issues another order in council, and this is known as the Northeastern Rhodesia Order in Council of 1900. Notice how in the name of this order, no particular kingdom is identified. So we now have two protectorates that are administered separately. The capital of Northeastern Rhodesia is Fort Jameson in an area that we now know as Chipata.
Harry Johnson was the chosen administrator for Northeastern Rhodesia. It just so happened that he was also the administrator for Nyasaland. Now, Harry's policy for Northeastern Rhodesia was that
the protectorate would be ruled by whites, developed by Indians, and worked by blacks. This is the beginning of the Indian migration into the protectorate and their generational impact on various economic industries in Zambia. The Lolly Treaty, which the British did not sign off, was renegotiated at Victoria Falls. This time, the signatories were Lewanika and Quarrendon, giving the concession the name the Quarrendon Concession. The terms of this concession were that the £2,000 a year payment to Lewanika be reduced to $850. That the British South Africa Company would give land to only white settlers, but not the reserved Barotse proper. This is because Lewanika had requested that the plains and the Sesheke area be reserved. By this time, Francois Colliard, the missionary, he declined to be part of the negotiation because he felt that the conditions were unfair to the Lozi people. The Lozi ruling class, the Kutas of Lealui, Nalolo, Sesheke, as well as some Indunas, were growing concerned about the loss of influence in the kingdom to the British South Africa Company, and they did not support the Barotseland proper partition. In addition to the Lozi ruling class, there was also the mission-educated elite. These were by now 30-year-olds, having been educated by the missionaries. The king's son, Letia, and a descendant of King Sipopa, whose name was Mokamba, were part of this mission-educated elite group of people. Mokamba eventually became the Ngambela. And this educated elite of people were somewhat resented by some older Indunas and Quarrendon, who referred to them as the so-called educated natives. You see, Quarrendon was determined that he and not they should have influence over the king. Quarrendon called them arrogant and cocky. The year is now 1901, and Lewanika sends his son Imwiko and a nephew to a private school in England.
the Mokalapa schools increased the amount of Lozi educated elite by providing an advanced curriculum, something the French mission schools did not do. After seeing how Lewanika and Mr. Mokalapa were going with the school, the British South Africa Company decided in 1907 to finally open a government school. And this school was known as the Barotse National School. It was the only one of its kind in both protectorates. This school was not funded by a mission. It produced skilled artisans, interpreters, and clerks. For those who could afford it, like Lewanika and some senior Indunas, they sent their children for education in South Africa. Now, I'm briefly just going to jump forward here for a minute. A very reliable source who was around 20 years old at the time in 1964 informed me that as a result of the education system in Barotseland, literally on Independence Day, October 24th, 1964, the majority of educated people in the new Zambia were from Barotseland. And this explains to me why, upon getting independence, Kenneth Kaunda passionately embarked on a mission to provide free education for every Zambian and just getting the university built up as soon as possible. These are his own words. Listen to him.
Yes. When we took over, Harry, we found 100 university graduates only. In 70 years of British rule, they produced only 100 university graduates. And of these, 3 were medical doctors only. That's all we had. And so when we took over, the first thing to do was education, health services, communication, roads, and so on. And we set to work on those programs. We established what was called 5-year development plans. The first time was, of course, 18 months to buy time to build proper 5-year development plans. And we got through that period with some little success, quite good success, I must say. We were beginning new ones. And from there on, we got used to it. We understood what we were doing. We accepted as a challenge. And we built. By the time we were leaving office in 1991, we had left about more than 35,000 university graduates in various fields. It was quite an achievement. We left, now this time, many schools, primary schools, colleges, and universities. We left clinics, dispensaries in various fields, various districts of the country. We have about 53 districts. We covered all these facilities, district hospitals, ending up with general hospitals, 1 in each province, 8 provinces, and the 9th one was the capital. We built there a teaching hospital, what we called University Teaching Hospital. So we had established something quite decent by the time we were leaving office. We're very proud of what we achieved.
That is amazing.
So let's go back to 1902 because there's something that I found very fascinating. King Lewanika is invited to the coronation of King Edward VII in England. He arrives in 1902. The coronation is delayed because of an illness that King Edward had, and so Lewanika spends months in England, and he uses that time traveling and taking in the culture of the United Kingdom. Here are some famous photographs related to his visit, And you get to see the beginning of the clothing style that was adapted amongst the Lozi elite that we have become accustomed to.
The admiral uniform was gifted to King Lewanika by King Edward. He was gifted this uniform for being a distinguished, loyal, great African king. The uniform has been worn by every single Litunga since then. The traditional dress of the Lozi women is known as the misisi. Now, I believe that the misisi has its origins in the attire that missionary wives would have worn at the time. So you're looking at the second and third photograph are of French missionaries, and the first photograph shows what a British missionary's wife would have worn at that time. This was the style. I'll show you what a misisi looks like in a minute. The Lozi men's attire, traditional attire, is known as the siziva. Now, I believe that the siziva was heavily influenced by the Scottish kilt. You have on their head the tam o'shanter, the vest, white shirt, kilt. You can wear white socks or different color socks, but white and always black shoes. So now let's have a look at the siziva and the misisi in action. Whilst in the United Kingdom, King Lewanika visited Scotland. And this is an article that was written by the Otago Daily Times, dated October 4th, 1902. It reads as follows: Distinguished visitors. Edinburgh is accustomed to receive visits from distinguished personages belonging to all nations and climes, but it has rarely been more interested in such visitors than it has been in the case of some who have lately been sojourning within it. First came King Lewanika from Barotseland, who had already been in Glasgow and who went on to Aberdeen and other parts of the north of Scotland. At a drawing room missionary meeting held in Edinburgh, the king paid a warm tribute of gratitude to the French missionary, Monsieur Collet, to whom he owes such a vast debt, and also pleaded that no intoxicating liquors should be sent to his country. Here is another article by the Evening Express, and this is dated May 26, 1902, so this was done just when he had arrived in the United Kingdom. King Lewanika, arrival of the dusky monarch. Reuters representative has had an interview with Lewanika, the paramount chief of the Barotse kingdom, who arrived by the Dunedin Castle as the royal guest for the coronation. The king, through his interpreter, said that he had had a very rough voyage and had been very ill. He was greatly impressed with the size and the beauty of the ship, but as he expressed it, did not like the moving. They then read to him a welcome letter that was given to him by the king. It says, "My friend, His Majesty the King has commanded me to convey to you his greetings on your arrival in England, and to say that he hoped that you have had a pleasant voyage and that you will enjoy your visit to this country. The king is pleased that you have come so many thousands of miles from your own country to accept his invitation to attend the coronation with the representatives of his dominions from all parts of the earth. His Majesty is pleased that you will be among them as paramount chief of the people of the Barotse kingdom who are under his protection. His Majesty hopes to see you soon after you arrive in London." Signed, J. Chamberlain. There are a number of cities and towns that King Lewanika visited whilst he was in the United Kingdom, but we're only going to look at two more. So he visited a town called Yovi, and here he is with the town's mayor. You can also see him here surrounded by the local people. You can make him out by his silk hat. Goudhurst. This is the town where King Lewanika's two sons attend the private school called Bethany House School. A memorial plaque to commemorate King Lewanika's visit was erected. And a welcome banner adorned the high street. King Lewanika would eventually return to Barotseland in early 1903. The British South Africa Company introduced a hut tax. It first began in northeastern Rhodesia and slowly extended through to Barotseland, northwestern Rhodesia, sometime between 1904 and 1913. It was charged at different rates in different districts, but was supposed to be equivalent to 2 months' wages to encourage or force the local Africans into a system of wage labor. There was some general unrest about it, and any protests were quickly suppressed. At one point in Barotseland, the taxes amounted to £33,000, and King Lewanika was given £1,250, which was a fixed amount. In 1911, the British South Africa Company merges both protectorates to become Northern Rhodesia, while still giving Barotseland a degree of autonomy. The capital of Northern Rhodesia was in Livingstone. Now, in order to ferry workers, the British South Africa Company, upon discovering copper, connected a rail line between Livingstone and Ndola. Lewanika had expected the line to go through Barotseland so that it could become some sort of an economic hub. After all, when the line had initially arrived from Bulawayo to Livingstone, the Litunga came to Victoria Falls for the official opening ceremony of the bridge conducted on 12 September 1905. The opening ceremony was a fun-filled regatta event. It was the first Zambezi International Regatta ever held, and the locals, the natives, the Barotse, were able to participate, and they were given 2 races with 4 to 6 men teams from Lealui, Sesheke, and Livingstone. It was a canoe race. They had to paddle really, really fast. And the winner was the Sesheke team, which happened to be the team that was led by the Mwandi Palace under Prince Letia. Security was provided by the Barotse Native Police, and music was provided by the Barotse Native Police Band. The last treaty Lewanika would sign before his death in 1916 was very contentious. This is because when the British South Africa Company found copper and the copper belt, as usual, they wanted it all. They wanted to own the mineral rights, the land rights, everything. The copper belt falls within the Lamba territory. It does not fall into the Lozi territory. It does not fall into Barotseland. So who are the Great Lamba people? It is said that in the 16th century, the founder of the Lamba tribe is believed to have been a female known as Chembokasaka Chimbala. She was the youngest wife of the great king Mwatayambwa of the Lubalunda kingdom, who didn't want to be part of a polygamous marriage, so she flees with her son Chembo, and they settle in what is today known as Lamba land on the copper belt at Nkeshibakabene Mofia, which means Lake of the Mofia clan, commonly known as St. Anthony, because the Catholics built a church there. The kingdom grew and spread into the southern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo in the Katanga province, a province equally rich in copper. Therefore, whether you are in Zambia or in the DRC, the copper belt of both countries is squarely Lamba land. The Lamba people are divided into a number of clans, and the clan descent is matrilineal. Now, this claim of land that the British South Africa Company wanted would extend all the way up to the Luapula River, and they wanted this land in the name of King Lewanika, saying that this is his land too. This land, this area, is well over 1,000 kilometers from Barotseland. Now, some people say that King Lewanika was forced to sign this concession. I have read in some literature where it's documented that on a number of occasions, the royal family and the Indunas would go to the High Commissioner for Britain and complain about the treatment that they're getting from the company, but that the High Commissioner would never do anything about it. And that Lewanika at some point lamented that whenever he tries to bring up any contentious issues, any issues that he was contending with, that the British South Africa Company would turn around and say, "Do you want to be conquered?" So like that was their get out clause. Like, we're doing this to protect you. Like, so do you want us to leave? So this was totally fraudulent. I just have to say, just totally fraudulent, because he knew that that was not his territory, and he got paid. I mean, he got paid. He was getting He was getting the money. The company was getting paid and Lewanika was getting paid. So none of the kings in the Lamba area, none of the chiefs, they didn't get nothing. So by now we have been through all of the concessions, starting from the very first to the very last. But this is just an example of the amounts of money broken down that King Lewanika was receiving from the British South Africa Company. Back in 1904, it was 4,000 pounds, and in today's money, that's about 13 million kwacha, or $714,000, or just about £500,000. King Lewanika had been sick for some time, and then in the evening, just before midnight, on February 4th, 1916, King Lewanika died. The cause of death was listed as heart and liver failure. He was survived by 44 children, which he had amongst a dozen or so wives. The funeral procession was described as follows. After 2 hours of rapid navigation, the cortege reached Nanikelako, a wide shoal emerging above the flood, where Lewanika had built a large hut covering the very place where he was now to be buried. The hut had been pulled down, and on its side the trench was being dug, about 10 yards square by 3.5 yards deep. Custom rules that the Litunda should be buried in the vessel that brought him to the island, and that he should be stretched out in it with his face turned toward the east. But for some unknown reason, the body was lifted out and placed in the grave, magnificently installed under a pavilion covered with superb mats, and around it everything the deceased could possibly need on his last journey. Magnificent furs, fly whisks mounted on ebony and ivory, decorated with beadwork, pottery, and carved wooden bowls, etc. Thank you for watching part 1 of this 2-part series. This is I Stand with Zambia YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe, share the video, like, and leave your comment.